Hi, I'm McAdam, and this is The Docket, where I usually talk about the court cases that I've covered over the past week. But this week, I'm going to do a little Q&A with my colleague, MacPherson, who covered an inquest last week, which actually wrapped up on Friday, late on Friday. Inquests often take place in courthouses. They have juries, they hear evidence, but it's actually not a criminal proceeding. So I think we'll start there. Alex, maybe if you could start by explaining what an inquest is all about and what the ultimate goal is.
You're right. I mean, an inquest looks and feels like a trial, but the big difference is rather than assessing guilt or innocence, which an inquest jury is absolutely not allowed to do, they have to hear the evidence and determine how and why somebody died, and if they want, make recommendations to prevent similar deaths in the future. So it's a pretty specific mandate.
And it's presided over by a coroner, correct?
Yes, usually a lawyer acting in the role of the coroner.
So no judges in inquests?
No judges.
So give us an overview about the case going into this inquest. What did we know about it before it started?
We didn't know a whole lot. There was a standoff with police in October of 2016 at a house on Avenue Q North. They responded to a burglary in process, and ultimately shots were fired, and a man was killed, and there wasn't a whole lot more information available at the time.
Did we even know his name at that point?
We didn't know his name. He was from Alberta, and his name is Joshua Megeney. He was from Medicine Hat. He was 28 years old, but we didn't know that at the time.
So obviously that was part of the evidence that you would have heard all week. Can you maybe give us some of the highlights of what we did find out that we didn't know before?
I think this inquest was really revealing because you got evidence from the two police officers who ultimately fired shots at Megeney that day. We heard evidence that they saw him point a hunting rifle at them after the door. They'd cleared the house except for one bedroom, which had a barricaded door. And when police decided to breach that door, it was sort of wedged open 6 to 12 inches, the inquest heard. And through that gap, they saw or testified that they saw him point a hunting rifle at them. They fired a total of 3 rounds, and one of the rounds from Saskatoon police officer's gun hit Megeney in the forehead, killing him.
Were there any particularly tense moments or controversial aspects of this inquest that stood out to you? Yes,
like other inquests I've covered, one of the challenges comes from the fact that the family of the deceased has standing. They have a lawyer who can cross-examine witnesses, and in this and other inquests I've seen, that can get a bit tense because obviously that family lawyer wants to test evidence from the authorities, but it runs up against this issue where nobody's on trial, and you often get very tense cross-examinations that are sometimes, for lack of a better term, smacked down by the presiding coroner. But this one had a few very tense moments where the family's lawyer, Scott Spencer, was cross-examining these officers and making sure that, or questioning their recollections and their decision-making and going quite deep into even basic police procedure.
So even though an inquest doesn't assign blame, we kind of heard elements of either suicide by cop or homicide. Can you explain what the jury ultimately found when it came to that?
Right, and one of the police officers who fired rounds at Megeney said he believed that it was a suicide or a death by cop scenario. What I found interesting, though, was that there was really no evidence called about, or that would have shed some light on what Megeney was thinking. We don't even know why he was in that house that day. And so the jury, out of the options that they had, which are homicide, suicide, accident, undetermined, and natural causes, they ruled his death a homicide. And they came back with 4 recommendations, all of which were aimed at the Saskatoon Police Service to, I think, to sort of generalize, to make it easier for officers in barricaded situations to communicate with people. And that was something we heard a lot about during the inquest, that communication through that door was very difficult.
And you wrote a column recently about what you saw were some of the flaws in the inquest process. You kind of touched on this already with the not knowing what was really going on that day leading up to what happened. What information do you think was missing in this case?
Well, and that's a big one. I don't want to say that we would have learned anything definitive about what Megeney was thinking that day. I think that might be impossible, but we don't know about his background with drugs. Methamphetamine was in his system. We don't know what he was doing in the house that day, and I thought that would have illuminated the circumstances a little bit more. But as with other inquests that I've covered, one thing that came to light after the fact was that the police investigate themselves when there are serious incidents or deaths involving police. And Scott Spencer, the family's lawyer, and other lawyers have pointed out that without criticizing the police's investigation here, that it presents an optical problem, a perceived conflict of interest, and that Saskatchewan should join with the other provinces that have independent oversight bodies to look into these. And even if you can't point to a flaw in the investigation, you ought to be able to, it would prevent questions about process from sort of overshadowing the significance of what happened here.
Did the police respond to this at all? I know that was pending. Did we get a police response?
They did, yeah. This week, Chief Troy Cooper spoke with the press and said that he's open to considering it, but the provincial government, which would ultimately have to legislate this, has said, we've got no plans to change anything.
All right. Well, as always, you can read more detailed accounts of these stories at thestarphoenix.com, and to follow me on Twitter for tweets from the courtroom, you can find me at BreezyBreeMC.